Hello, friends of the speaker, friends of Kendall, and friends of, most of all, friends of bees. Welcome to the Cape Lecture Series. I am Ron Hoy, and a member of the Executive Council of CAPE, which is the Cornell academics and professors emeriti. CAPE welcomes our friends and colleagues here to the Kendall Auditorium, as well as those joining us on Zoom. Now, before introducing today's distinguished speaker, I want to extend CAPE's sincere appreciation to Kendall for making this lovely auditorium available for CAPE's lecture series. Kendall generously provides AI support, as you saw going on up here before the lecture, and as well as free parking and tasty refreshments and coffee for all attendees in person. Now, many thanks to Melissa Rukelich, CAPE's new and able administrator who provides support to our Zoom audience. Melissa is very capably filling the very big shoes of her predecessor, Cindy Robinson, known to many of you. Zoomers are encouraged to submit questions during and just after today's lecture online via the Q&A box, which Melissa will field as our moderator. And for those of you who have questions from the audience, please hold them until after the lecture, and then I will scurry about, microphone in hand, so that you can share your questions with the rest of us. Okay, our speaker will, as I said, our speaker will address your questions after the lecture. Now, before we begin this standard announcement, please mute your personal devices, cell phones, set them to vibrate. And now I'd like to turn to our speaker. You are in for a real treat today. It's a very special pleasure for me to introduce my good friend and colleague of almost 40 years, Tom Seeley, the Horace White Professor Emeritus in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior, where as a teacher, he won many prizes, including the Merrill Presidential Teaching Award in 2004, and who has had a truly brilliant, internationally impactful research and writing career, bringing him national and international kudos for many years. And his books have won prizes for their lucidity and relevance to the lay audience. And his subjects, of course, the life history, the natural history, and behavior of bees. Tom Seeley grew up in Ithaca as a kid. He was actually a faculty brat. His dad was on the CALS faculty, and he roamed the local fields and streams, even then with a keen interest in natural history that turned to curiosity about bees by the time he got to Ithaca High School, where he began keeping beehives. And this led to a lifelong both professional and personal pursuit of beekeeping. Now, when he graduated from Ithaca High, he left to attend Dartmouth College, where he majored in chemistry. But of course, the natural history bug was already deeply instilled within him, and this led him to pursue a PhD at Harvard in biology, and did so brilliantly there that he was elected to Harvard's prestigious Society of Fellows. Tom studied with the eminent biologist E.O. Wilson, noted expert and author of many best-selling books himself. Now, Wilson's expertise, of course, is the world's expert on the world's ants. Wilson is perhaps best known for his book called Sociobiology. Now, permit me to read the qualifications for the Society of Fellows that I think fit Tom to a T, looking back over his career. Quote, "The purpose of the society is to give scholars at an early stage of their scholarly careers an opportunity to pursue their studies in any department of the university, free from formal requirements. They must be persons of exceptional ability, originality, and resourcefulness, and should be of the highest caliber of intellectual achievement, which is to say, manifesting extraordinary creativity and shaping the future direction of their chosen field." Tom, mission accomplished, I say, looking over your career. So, Tom, after leaving, I know it was while you were a senior, while you were a junior fellow, maybe you were a senior fellow by then, that I first met you in Woods Hole, the MBO, when you gave a lecture to the neurobiology course. So anyway, Tom finished at Harvard, and then he joined the faculty at Yale for, I think, 7 years before we were able to bring him home to Cornell, where he's been ever since. And it testifies to a distinguished career in biology. It has been my privilege and honor to have been Tom's colleague on the NBB faculty. He was my department chair. He led the graduate program. Tom was exemplary in service, academics, and teaching, as well as being a world-class scientist. And now here to tell you about the marvelously complex behavior of honeybees is Ithaca's own Tom Seeley.
My goodness. Thank you, Rod. It's very kind of you to go through both our professional and personal histories together.
I want to quote, I'm going to borrow a quote from a distinguished entomologist with a wonderful surname for an entomologist, Wigglesworth. And in 1987, he wrote a lovely little article titled, "Is the Honeybee Conscious?" And here's what he wrote. And what just made him think about this issue. The honeybee is as far above the general run of other insects as man is above his fellow mammals. The complexity of the social life of honeybees, their powers of mutual communication, their diversity in skills and employment, their debates and decisions on policy are so remarkable that they raise the question of the capacity of the worker bee for thinking. Now, I'm not going to go into the topic of whether honeybees have consciousness and awareness of their thoughts. I'm going to be focusing on this item here, their powers of mutual communication. And they have these powers, which are outstanding because they live in complex societies. So in a sense, they've got a lot to talk about. So we'll be looking at 4 behaviors. And these are all communication behaviors, signaling behaviors. We're going to look at how they provide directions to important places in the environment, water sources, food sources, and some other things. How they call for help in the house hunting, honey making process. How they rouse sleeping hive mates in the morning. Okay, you'll take notes on that one. And how they request help in grooming. I think we all, and so there's some parallels to our own situations, of course. Here. Behavior 1, how does one worker honeybee provide directions to a hive mate to find an important place? And when I say an important place, I mean it could be a source of water, a source of food, a future home site, a source of resins, things like that. And we humans are very good at this. And the question I pose to you now is, what other animals are able to tell another individual about the location of something important without either leading them there or marking the way with a trail? What other species can you think of, animals? Well, it's a tough question because there's only one other species or group of insects, the honeybees, that have this ability to abstractly indicate the location of something that's important. And they do this by performing a dance that you've probably all heard about called the waggle dance. And here's what it looks like. Here's our waggle dancing bee. She waggles, stops, comes around, waggles, stops, comes around. And you can see other bees pressing in around her, getting the information from her. She's indicating the direction and the distance, in this case, to a home site. Now, how does this work? How does a bee indicate a location by performing a waggle dance? Well, imagine we've got the situation of a bee that is living in a tree. Where did that nice pointer go? I think they took it. Living in a tree, hollow tree, and she's found a patch of flowers. You can see that the patch of flowers is 40 degrees, it lies on a line that's 40 degrees to the right of a line that would point to the sun's azimuth, the direction in which the sun is if you projected it down to the horizon. So she's got to tell those other bees that angle, 40 degrees, because they use the sun as their directional reference, and she's got to tell the bees the distance. She indicates this information by performing a dance that's a miniaturized reenactment of the flight out to the flowers. And when I say reenactment, what she does is she does that waggle behavior that we saw, where she waggles for a while and then comes around, waggles again. And the coding of the direction and distance information is that she, well, first of all, to indicate the distance, she adjusts the duration of the waggle run. The longer, the greater the distance, the longer that waggle run lasts, as we see over here. Distance can be out to 5,000 or more meters, 3 or more miles. And so the greater the distance, the longer the duration of the waggle run. It's like representing a longer flight. And then she indicates the direction by using inside the hive. She switches from her reference from being the sun, which she uses as a reference outside the hive, to straight up on the combs, the vertical combs in the hive. That becomes her directional reference. And she just copies that angle of her flight. She copies that angle and while she does her waggle runs. And that may seem pretty straightforward, but it was a lot of work to be worked out. And the gentleman who did so is Carl von Frisch, who received the Nobel Prize for his discovery of this and other things that he did. I love this image of him, both as an elderly gentleman, Nobel Prize time, but also here at the old Zoological Institute in Munich in the 1920s. I like the way he was working doing his experiment with wearing a nice white lab coat. You don't see that much today. What he was doing there, by the way, was doing tests of the bees' odor discrimination abilities. Those little boxes held different odors, different scents. So that was behavior one. And that, as I say, that waggle dance is a very special behavior. Behavior two is calling for help in the honey honey making process. Now, I'm going to explain momentarily that the honey making process involves a division of labor, or a two-stage process. You've got bees that go out to the flowers, load up with the nectar, and then when they get back to the hive, they regurgitate nectar to other bees, put out their tongues, imbibe the nectar that's being regurgitated, and then they take the nectar and process it and put it in cells. Here's this division of labor, or two-stage process. Okay, so one loop is the collecting cycle. Bees go out to flowers, come back into the hive. And so our forager leaves the hive, goes out to flowers, loads up, and then comes back and is met by one of these nectar receiver bees in the nectar unloading area, which is just inside the hive entrance. And then one of these bees, which we'll call a food store bee, she gets the load of nectar and then she processes it, adds enzymes to it, evaporates some of the water from it, and puts it in the honeycombs. And then she comes back to the processing cycle to complete her side of the processing. Now, there's a problem with this, however, or the bees have a problem. The rate of nectar collection is highly variable, depending on the weather, time of day, etc. So the need for the food stores varies greatly. And I think we can all understand, going through shopping lines in grocery stores and so forth, that when the supply, or when the customer traffic goes up, the lines can get pretty long unless there are more checkout counters opened up. And so that's the problem the bees have. They have to have a means so that when the nectar collection rate goes up, also the capacity for processing goes up. So that means activating more food stores. How does that work? Well, the bees have evolved a solution that's similar to what works for the sardine factories up in Maine. These sardine factories had the problem that the daily catch of herring is highly variable. Depends on when the herring schools come in or not. And the way they solved this problem was when the fishing boats came in with good loads, large loads of herring, a factory whistle was sounded. And if people in the village or the town heard that, they would come down to the factory and get engaged in processing the fresh herring to make them into sardines. Now, do honeybee colonies also have a whistle to call for more food stores? You bet they do. Now, what is the bee's equivalent of a factory whistle? It is a behavior called the tremble dance, and it's performed by stymied foragers. Let's look at this dance. Now, I'm going to try to turn it on. There we go. Now, I do need to point. Oh, I'm supposed to use this pointer on the computer. Here we go. Here's our tremble dancer. Doesn't she look kind of like a spastic bee? Like she's got a problem. But no, she doesn't have a problem. She's solving a problem by making this signal. And you can see other bees will orient to her. Pay attention. I'll run that again. You can see, there she is. Bees will turn to her. She's not walking around. It's nothing as beautiful a movement as the waggle dance, but it's an important signal. Okay. Now this signal has a pretty interesting history, actually. But before I get to that, I'll explain how this works. What the bee does is when a nectar collector comes into the hive, coming back from a good patch of flowers, she takes note of how long she has to search to find somebody who will start taking her nectar. We call that the search time. And if the food source is good and the search time is short, less than 20 seconds, the bee will do a waggle dance. She knows that there's plenty of processing power receiving power present. So she's going to make the signal that'll turn up the rate of nectar collection. However, if she has a long search time, she will do this tremble dance. And that will call for more bees and these turns out to be middle-aged bees, not forager-age bees, to turn away from other jobs to help the colony capitalize on the availability of nectar. And then there's, like most control systems, there's an intermediate situation where the bee will do neither dance. It's actually, when I show this to engineers, they say, wow, this is a brilliant control system, very well tuned. I agree. Now, I want to share with you a history note. I always love the history of scientific investigations. This tremble dance was first reported and described in the 1920s by Carl von Frisch. He saw it, and he described it, I've translated from the German, as follows: at times one sees a strange behavior by bees who've returned home from a sugar water feeder or other goal. It is as if they had suddenly acquired the disease St. Vitus's dance. We would call that chorea, I think, today. It's a neurodegenerative disease. So that's what he wrote in 1923. He was puzzled by it. And let's see, what did I want to say more about this? He was puzzled by it. Oh yeah, and he said, and he was puzzled about it for the rest of his life. He died in 1984, 86, something like that. And he said, this is very strange behavior. I'm not sure, I don't know if it's a bee whose nervous system is failing, which I don't think he really believed. And he said, I'll give a prize to whoever finally figures this out. Alas, I figured it out a few years after he died. So I would have loved to get the Carl von Frisch prize. That would have been special. Behavior 3. Here's one that we can all relate to. Arousing, this is about arousing sleepy hive mates in the morning. Does anybody have this situation or recall this situation when they had little children getting ready, getting up in time for the school bus or whatever? So here's one that's we can all relate to. And the behavior is shown in this image here. This bee who is making the signal, and it's called, it's not a very creative name, shaking signal, shakes her body while grabbing another bee. And that vibration, that up and down vibration of her body is transmitted into the other bee, and it activates that bee. Let's look a little bit more at this. Oh, let's first look at it, the behavior itself. And this is a video of an active forager shaking sleeping foragers. Here's our shaker, goes up, grabs the bee, finds another one, finds another one, and another one. I'll share a little funny anecdote, cracks me up at least. I was showing this video to a group of beekeepers in Long Island, and a little lady in the back says, I think they're having sex. No, these are worker bees. They don't have sex. It's a wake-up call. Oops, here we go. So again, active foragers are shaking sleeping foragers. Now, why do they need this? Why do they need a wake-up call? Oops. Well, the reason they need a wake-up call is because bees go to sleep at night and on days of poor weather. This is an energy conservation adjustment that the foragers make. And one of my students, Barrett Klein, has devoted his PhD investigations to studying bee sleep and insect sleep more broadly. And these are some of his photographs. And you might wonder, how do you know if an animal is asleep? Well, there's actually 5 criteria that have to be fulfilled to say that an animal is asleep. Here they are for a bee. The bee, first of all, is immobile. These are bees at night. They're just hanging, motionless, dangling from the comb with just their front forelegs engaged hooked into the comb. So the bee is immobile. Her body hangs limply. This bee illustrates the limply. She's got two of her claws on her 2 left fore and mid legs engaged in a chunk of wax, and there she is. just conked out, deep asleep. Body hangs limply, breathing rate slows. You might wonder, how do you know what the breathing rate of a bee is? Well, they have pumping motions with their abdomen. You can tell when they're breathing. Body temperature drops. How do you take a bee's temperature? With a thermovision camera. You get a nice good reading of the body temperature. And her resistance to disturbance increases. Guess how you test that? You poke the bee. You see if she responds. Sleeping bees do not respond unless poked repeatedly. So bees, foragers go to sleep at night and on days of poor weather. It saves energy. And this is where the shaking signal comes in, because on the morning of successful days, the foragers, most of them are still asleep at first thing in the morning, at least. And so the first foragers that come back discover that the day is sunny, the flowers are producing nectar, et cetera, et cetera. They come back and they walk around and produce the shaking signal. And I'll just show you this graph on the right is the record of this bee, who was the first bee in an experimental situation to come out after 3 days of rainy weather, to come out to a little feeding dish. 3 days of, and what did she do when she came back? What we've got here is a plot for her first 30+ visits back to the observation hive. And these bars, well, if the bar is black, it means it encodes how many shaking signals, how many other bees she shook. If it's white, it indicates how many circuits or waggle runs of the waggle dance she produced. And you can see she came back around 9 o'clock, first trip around 9 o'clock, and her first 10 or 11 trips were almost entirely shakings, just going around shaking bees, shaking. And then she would, each time she came back, she would regurgitate the load of food she had, and then she'd go back. And then you can see she started mixing it up, some shaking and some waggling. And by noon, it wasn't until noon, she did straight waggle dances. So shaking signal and the waggle dances work together to activate foragers. So we're not alone in using shakings to do the wake ups. I like to call it the shake and wake signal. I'll play it just one more time while it's still fresh in mind. Here it is. Hey, you, wake up. There we go. Pretty cute, huh? One of the things I find so delightful is people, especially beekeepers, have seen these behaviors for decades, if not centuries. And it's been a real honor to just be in a situation, thanks to Cornell University, to being able to devote time to solving the mystery of what's going on here. So we'll do one more mystery. And this is behavior 4. It's the request for help in grooming. Now, what you see here is a photograph of a bee that was foraging on dandelions. Very timely, huh? And she's come back dusted with dandelion pollen. And this is very adaptive for a bee. One of the things about bees is they get all their protein and fats from pollen. Pollen's a very important food. And that's why their bees are so fuzzy and hairy. They've got all these hairs which will to which the pollen grains can attach, and then they can groom that pollen off and bring it home to have good food besides sugar water coming in. So this bee was, as you can see, dusted with pollen from foraging on the dandelions. Now, when she gets home, she will make a request for help in getting groomed up, because there's parts of her body she can groom just fine, and there are other parts that she can't groom very well at all, as we shall see. Now, how does she groom? Bees, the legs of bees are endowed with a wonderful set of combs. And it's a complicated process, and I won't try to go through it in detail, but I just want to point out, here's just and these are Margie Nelson's drawings. This is the inside and outside of just the hind leg. And the way that, in a nutshell, what goes on here is the bee can use these combs on the lower part of the leg to stroke through the hairs on her abdomen, these hind legs near the back of her body. And then they will the leg of the other side has, well, she will use this rake structure to brush off the pollen that have collected in these combs. And then she then flexes her leg. There's a little device here called the pollen press, and it pushes the pollen that is been collected on the rake and pushes it up into a thing called the pollen basket. And that's how they carry it home. But that's just for the hind leg. The foreleg and the middle leg, they've got their own special tricks. So they're very skilled at collecting pollen. But there are hard to groom spots on a bee's body. And this bee here, who is, I forget the name of this flower. No, this is a Scottish honeybee, so it's up in the Highlands. It's a weedy invasive, but it's great for pollen. But anyhow, it illustrates that here's a bee that's been going to this kind of flower, and she grooms herself. She's groomed her abdomen. Her abdomen's not gooped up with pollen, and nor is her head. But there is part of her that is. It's the top of her thorax. There's this band where she just can't reach it with any of her legs. And it kind of gets in the way of the functioning of the wings, or it can. So what's a dusty worker bee to do? Ask for help. And the way she asks for help is she performs a dance, which I like to call the grooming invitation dance. And it involves a bee performing this dance. I think I've got a video to show it to you in a second. She performs this dance, and it elicits another bee to come over and clean up the parts of her body that she cannot receive. So here's the groomer, here's the groomer and the bee, the groomee here. Spreads out her wings so they can go over and get cleaned up. Oops, no, I didn't. I forgot to put in the video of the grooming invitation dance. But I can describe it. Well, I've tried to describe it over here. Maybe that's because I don't have a video. It looks like a bee that's just rocking her body back and forth. It's not like the waggle dance. It's not like the tremble dance. It's not like the shaking signal. It looks like a very spastic bee that just doesn't. But and this is performed in the dark, like all of these signals, and evidently other bees can either feel the vibration in the comb or they're feeling the vibrations, the airborne vibrations around them, and they're attracted. And it works really well. I'm pretty sure these bees that are doing the grooming know exactly what they're doing, why they're coming to that bee, because they just climb right on the back of the bee and go to work. So to summarize, we've looked at 4, I'd say, pretty nifty skills of worker honeybees: how they provide directions to important places, food sources, and so forth; how they call for help in the honey making process, get called to get unloaded; how they rouse sleeping hive mates in the morning; and how they request help in grooming when they get dirty. And I want to stress, this is just a peek at the behavioral skills of worker bees. They possess at least 7 more mechanical signals, some of which remain quite mysterious, which is great, good for the next generation. And they also possess 10 known chemical signals, and probably a lot more. And then the reason why I say probably a lot more is because when the chemical signals are there, they're much harder for us to detect them. And I know that because that's why I studied chemistry, to learn about those chemical signals. And I quickly learned, no, study the mechanical signals. They're so much more conspicuous and recorded and so forth. So I just want to go back to end by going back to this quote from Mr. Wigglesworth: "The honeybee is as far above the general run of other insects as above his fellow mammals." And I'm highlighting here the complexity of the social life of honeybees, their powers of mutual communication, of which I've given you a glimpse, et cetera, raises the question of capacity of the worker honeybee for thinking. Thank you very much.
Okay, slightly off the topic, but still on bees. And this is, does the bee somebody give me the word for that, actually be taking place, because this is a big hype in a lot of the popular press. But I've also seen professionals say, no, there's no change in the number of bees. They're just as healthy as ever. So what's the actual situation in bee world?
Peter's asked, is the news that you hear of a crisis in bees, is that for real or not? I think it's depending on where you are and where the places are. There have been extensive use of pesticides in some parts of, for example, the United States, and those really do kill honeybees. Probably the worst situation are the vast almond orchards in California, where the beekeepers have a real challenge getting the bees in and out without getting the bees killed. There has been some spread of a virus from honeybees to some other bees, and this was an introduced. It's another example of an introduction of a parasite. So I don't think it's not a really dangerous situation, but it's one where beekeepers have to be much more careful with their colonies and treat them for these diseases.
Since we've got one mic, I'm going to read the question to you from our Zoom audience. And there are a couple, but we'll start with, can we use sugar water jars to feed bees in my yard? How to do it?
Let's see, I put a little scent in the sugar water, and I would put your jar of sugar water on top of something that is a bright flower color, a yellow or a blue, for example. Those would be the best colors. And I would put some anise extract scent, put one drop of anise extract scent into, say, a quart of the sugar solution that you're going to make up. Bees are very attracted to that aroma. And you just invert the jar and put it on top of a plate, and then put a couple of toothpicks underneath the jar. So there's a little meniscus the bees can put their tongues into.
All right, I'm going to read another one from Zoom, and then we'll go back to the audience here. And this is a question I have too. How did you figure out the meaning of the dance?
Oh, yeah, like the shaking signal and the tremble dance. Almost Ronald can, I think you'll agree with me. You see, almost all of the discoveries occur by chance, not by chance, but at least by surprise. You've set up an experiment to address one question, and the bees come back and do something different than what you were expecting. And you wonder, oh, what I've created is obviously the context in which the bee wants to make this particular signal. And then you go and refine your hunch or your hypothesis about what was actually triggering it. So it's a process of working with the organism, seeing them doing something odd, something surprising, and thinking about, okay, well, what exactly was going on there? That's how it works. It's chance, keeping your eyes open and noticing things that are surprising, and thinking about, okay, how can I test that?
Hi, so my question has to do with, do all of the worker bees and forager bees have the same amount of authority within the hive, and can they all use those dances to communicate?
Yeah, question. They all certainly have the same authority. There's no hierarchy among the or status differences among the worker bees. That said, some bees are, for whatever reason, are much more predisposed to produce waggle dances or tremble dances. That's kind of a mystery for us, but yeah, it's a pretty even playing field.
Thank you.
Other question?
Yes.
Hi.
I noticed you mentioned when you're talking about worker bees, you use she all the time, and having had bees for a long time, I've still had this nagging question of why it is that the gender has been applied to worker bees in that way. I know about drones, and I know about
Yeah.
but It's just curious.
Well, they have ovaries. And so that's why we call them females.
They have what?
Ovaries. They can make eggs. Even the workers can make eggs. They usually don't as long as their mother queen is present. But if they lose her, they can lay eggs. They'll be unfertilized and they will produce males. It's kind of an emergency situation. Yeah. The drones are, we call them males because they have testes. So just basic biological. Yeah.
So how do you tell one bee from another bee?
Well, the only way you can do that is if you give them identification cards or tags. And that's where we put, some people say, all you do, Tom, is label bees and watch them. And that's sort of true. In many of the experiments that I didn't go through detail, almost all of those experiments involve working with a small group of bees that I labeled for individual identification. And we have little, kind of like little license plates that you can glue on the thorax of a bee, 5 different colors, 0 to 99, so you can get 500 combinations that way. And then if you put one of 8 different colors of dots of paint on the abdomen, then you got 4,000 combinations. And that's a common number of individuals that we'll label for an experiment. It's many fewer than that, but that's how you do it. And then I'm really glad you asked that question, because once you've done that, you really have a clear sense of the individual personalities, variability of individual bees. Even though we got the same mother, all in the same colony, some are like that, go out early and come back and do the shaking signals, and others sleep on till noon. So thanks for that question.
So again, how would you characterize the behavior of ants as opposed to bees?
Ah, yes, ants. Yeah, you might be, I was thinking, probably should explain that. So thank you for asking that question, because ants also live in these complicated societies. The difference is, one of the differences is between ants and bees is the bees live in they range very widely from their nests. So their orientation skills have to be generally a lot stronger. They're going out for miles. Most ants will go out maybe 100 yards or so maximum. And the ants have achieved behavioral complexity in a somewhat different way. They have castes. Different individuals might be of different sizes, for example, and they work in different parts of the nest. So they have a division of labor. So one individual ant doesn't have to have as many tools in her toolkit as does a worker bee, because all worker bees are basically the same, and they're going to do all of the jobs in the nest. So I think that's one of the division of labor is not by age so much in ants as it is in physical castes and other forms. So they don't have, each ant doesn't have to be quite as well endowed with behavioral skills. Works with a subset. I guess it's like, I don't know, with humans too. You can zero in on a few things and know those well.
I was just wondering how many days or months a worker bee lives on average.
On average, in the summer, it's only about 30 days. In the winter, it can be 6 to 8 months, because there's a lot of turnover in the summer because they're going out of the hive, they're doing these flights. It's very intensive work. It's also very dangerous work. There are a lot of predators on airborne bees. So their lives in the summer are usually only about 30 days, but in the winter, it's safe to stay at being in the hive, and their whole physiology changes.
I'm going to go back to Zoom questions, 2 of them. One, I'm going to read verbatim, and I hope you can get the question out of it. It says, any active behavior of bee regarding the need/desire for swarming would be good if I could recognize it other than by the apparition of queen cells.
Yeah, this is a beekeeper wondering how as he or she inspects her colonies of bees, how does a human recognize that a colony is preparing to swarm? Um, the only really reliable signal that I know of is the presence of the production of those queen cells that the colony is making. And the reason a colony makes queen cells before it swarms is that, and when the colony divides itself, i.e. produces a swarm, the mother queen leaves with the swarm, and the daughter colony, which is in the old home site, it needs to have its own queen. So the bees have made queen cells, which will soon produce young queens. So it's the presence of those queen cells that is the most striking indicator. There's some more subtle effects, like some people say the bees are working less, but I haven't found that easy to do, easy to use.
Another question on Zoom. Is there any concern for bee extinction due to drastic changes in the habitat?
Probably the most serious cause that I know of where beekeepers are concerned about losing colonies, again, comes back to pesticides, heavy use of pesticides. In fact, the beekeepers that take their bees into the Central Valley in California for pollination, when they bring those bees out, they get them on trucks and they bring them to the Midwest, the upper Midwest, where the crops that are just being grown, and they don't have to be sprayed. So that's very clean forage, and that they find that that's what they really need to do.
Other questions from the audience? Oh,
I have a question regarding not honeybees, but
Mhm.
carpenter bees.
Oh, yeah.
I let them chew on my house all the time, and I don't mind it too much. But this spring, I've observed lots of dead carpenter bees around the house, and I'm wondering if there's anything going on with carpenter bees in Ithaca dying off.
Yeah. Well, let me first begin by explaining, in case somebody doesn't know what a carpenter bee is. It's a bee that drills a hole. It's like a perfectly drilled or chewed hole that goes into usually older wood, dry wood, and it'll make a tunnel that could be 12 inches, 15, 20 inches long. It's made by a female, and she will rear her young in a series of cells that she'll make in that tunnel that she's produced. And you were asking, what can you do to discourage them?
No, I actually encourage them.
Oh, great.
But my question is I'm surprised to see so many dead carpenter bees around the house.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
wondering whether there's any problem going on, with the carpenter bee population that you might be aware of.
I'm not aware of a problem with the population, but let me ask a question. At what time of year do you see these dead bees?
Well, it's happening right now, actually. I walk out to my car in the driveway and I see a half a dozen dead carpenter bees in the driveway.
No, I don't have a good answer. I do know the males fight like fury for mating. That might be it, but I can't say for sure. Do you know anything, Ron, about? Yeah. These are beautiful bees, the carpenter bees. And boy, Cornell is well endowed with carpenter bees. They've got all these old, if you want to see them in action, go to the Big Red Barn, and they've got a pavilion next to it. All of those timbers that make up that pavilion are riddled with carpenter bee nests. Also, all the nice window trim around, well, the wooden window frames around in Goldwyn Smith Hall are also prime habitat, or this gentleman's house. They're big, they're big bees, and they look a little scary, and they make a lot of sound, but they're harmless. Those are just the big females.
I think we have another Zoom question here, and it says, have you ever been stung by a bee or more? I don't know if they mean more bees or anything else, but with all your work.
I think the answer here is countless times. Yeah, it's just, even though I don't invoke their stinging, that's every once in a while you put your hand down on a bee while you're opening up the hive or taking out a frame of comb, and bingo, the bee lets you know that that's a dangerous situation for her, and she's gonna let you know. Sting back. Yep.
I think we'll end on this final Zoom question. It says, is there a behavior that bees lack now that would be beneficial for them to develop for the hive to enhance their future? So you get to predict what a behavior they could use they don't have now.
Well, if they had sensitivity to pesticides and knew what odors, if they had built-in knowledge of what the pesticides are that they can find on sense on flowers and avoid that, that would be good for them. But that's something new. And they do have aversions. So it's not far-fetched to think that they could possess an aversion to a certain aroma. I'm trying to think what's something they really dislike. There's a lot of things that are surprisingly that they do like manure and the urine that goes with manure. But there are some scents that they really do. Oh yeah, things like the scents of ants. They really dislike any aroma. Anything that smells like an ant is a no-no to a bee. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tom, for a wonderful talk.
No
Now,
problem.
I'd like to comment, Tom it's typical that you be very modest. Somebody asked the question, well, how did you in effect, how did you read those movements and dances and make sense of them? And Tom said, oh, luck. It's not luck. Discovery and opportunity only happens to the prepared mind. And Tom's preparation was lifelong, and it wasn't just through study, it was through love of his animals. He showed one picture of a bee scientist, Carl von Frisch. He was the great discoverer. He is the founder of the feast, and Tom is if you could visualize von Frisch's son, it would be Tom Seeley. But Tom, on behalf of Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. I went to Carl von Frisch's house and talked to one of his daughters. That was the closest I got to the gentleman.